we'll read now our story of the fisherman's friend. From the Gospel of Luke, chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. Once while Jesus was standing beside the lake of Gennesaret, and Gennesaret is what Luke calls the Sea of Galilee, he was standing beside the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God. He saw two boats there at the shore of the lake. The fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon Peter, and asked him to put out a little way from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon, whom we also call Peter, Simon answered, "Master, we've worked all night long, but have caught nothing. Yet if you say so, at your word, I will let down the nets." When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all who were with him were amazed at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people." When they had brought their boats to the shore, they left everything and followed him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You know, it was just last week as we were reading about Jesus in the synagogue at Nazareth that the people got so mad out at him there because of his preaching, they tried to chase him out of the synagogue. And now here we are this week. The disciples get so upset about Jesus' fishing that they tell him he has to go away. It strikes me as interesting that so many people in the beginning of the Gospels are trying to get rid of Jesus the whole time. It's quite different from the way we usually think that we would react to Jesus' presence. Last week, the choir was singing a beautiful anthem, "I come to the garden of lone, where the dew is on the roses, and the birds I hear through the singing air," whatever. But he walks with me and he talks with me and he tells me I am his own. It's just a wonderful image of Jesus and you in the garden, best friends, just enjoying some time there. It doesn't sound like Peter's reaction, "Go away from me, Lord." It doesn't sound like the reaction of the people in the synagogue of Nazareth. "We're going to get you out of here." What do you think's going on? Or have you ever seen those lists? Sometimes people will say, if you could pick one person that you would like to meet in heaven and have a conversation with, or if you could pick one person that you could sit down and have a conversation with, dinner with, and ask all kinds of questions, who would that be? Well, usually the top of the list is Elvis. But then after Elvis comes Jesus. So people seem to be pretty interested in being able to sit down comfortably with Jesus and ask him some questions. Not so with the people at the synagogue in Nazareth, and not so with Peter fishing out on the Sea of Galilee. So in some respects, this story begins with the question of, guess who's coming fishing? The fishermen are there by the Sea of Galilee. They've put their nets out on the shore. Apparently, we learned without much luck after all their fishing. Their nets are out there drying, getting prepared to be used for the next day. Jesus has been teaching and performing miracles throughout the region, so much so that there's a crowd that continues to gather around him. They gather him around at the shore. They're so tight and so packed in that he thinks, well, if I take a boat, I can go out into the water a little bit and teach the crowd from being out in the water, and it'll act like an amplifier, the water, as I speak to them. So he asks the disciples to take him out in their boats a little ways from shore so he can teach the crowd, and they agree to. They seem to be interested in, perhaps even aware of some of the things that he's been teaching, some of the things that he's been doing. Seems to go well up to this point. Peter says when Jesus requests him to go out a little bit further, Peter even says at that point, we've been fishing all night, but at your word, as though he has a sense of Jesus' importance and Jesus' significance, certainly within terms of the crowd and certainly the effect and power of his word on the crowds, because even at this point, Peter's willing to say, we fished all night, we know what we're doing, there's not any fish out there, but at your word, if you tell us to go out and put down our nets. And so they do. And suddenly, as they put down their nets into the deep, they begin to catch so many fish that the nets are breaking. There are so many fish, the catch is so great that they have to call their partners in the other boats to come and help them bring all the fish in. And by the time they get all the fish in, the boats are actually sinking. And it begins to become clear in some ways that when Jesus gets into the boat, there's oftentimes going to be trouble. When Jesus got into the boat with the disciples at other times, storms blew up on the Sea of Galilee, and they woke up afraid and scared. When the disciples were out on the boat and Jesus started to walk to them across the water, once again they were afraid and scared. It's a ghost. It should be a little red flag warning. When you get out on a boat and Jesus is about to get in the boat with you, or Jesus is in the boat with you, there's some kind of trouble afoot. Things are not exactly going to go like you expect. When they see this miraculous catch of fish, when they see what's going on at this point, Simon Peter says, "Go away from me, Lord. Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." Before, when I've always read this story, it just seems to happen so fast. It's just one thing right after another. But as I reflected on the passage this week, and as we talked about it in our men's Bible study, the scene seemed to take on kind of a greater length with perhaps more time transpiring and taking place over the event. I imagine it would have taken quite a bit of time to throwing these nets out into the deep and then hauling in all these fish, and Peter and the other disciples just going, what's going on here, is beginning to sink into the effect. And then all the work of pulling the fish into the boat, and so much so that the boats began to sink. So I began to feel like there's been a lot that Peter is trying to comprehend, trying to take in. And finally, after taking all that in, he looks up and says to Jesus, "Go away, Lord. Go away, Jesus. Depart from me, for I am a sinful man." Now you wonder, what would have prompted him to say that? Luke says that they were amazed at the catch of fish. It may have been, I wonder a little bit, if Peter was just overwhelmed at what this was doing to his fishing business. Have you all ever seen the commercials where some small little company makes, a handbag or something else unique that suddenly goes viral, and then suddenly the little company is overwhelmed with orders, so much so that they cannot catch up and keep up with all the orders that are coming in, and the commercial says, well, you need this bigger company, FedEx or UPS or somebody else, to come in and just handle everything for you. Maybe Peter is saying, "Go away, Jesus. We're just a little fishing company. We can't handle all these fish. You're going to ruin the business." He could have been saying that. Or he could have, he could have looked up and seen over on the shore some Roman guards, tax collectors over on the shore, seeing all that catch of fish. They could have been saying, "We're going to get a good tax out of these guys now." And Peter could have been saying, "Go away, Jesus. Look at the trouble that you're getting me into with those who are there waiting to collect taxes." But Peter says, "Go away from me, Lord. Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." It's interesting when you look at that idea throughout the rest of the gospel and think of other places where people are identified as sinful people in the gospels. It's something that the religious leaders accuse Jesus of and charge him against repeatedly throughout the gospels. This fellow, he's a friend of drunkards and sinners. He associates with them. He eats with them. As though the worst thing in the world that could possibly happen would be for a person of a holy and good life to come too close to a person of a sinful life. They say about Jesus over and over again, he's a friend of tax collectors and sinners. They go up and ask him directly, how can you go and sit down and eat and have dinner with tax collectors and sinners? As though the idea is that the worst thing in the world would be that you would get too close to them. Perhaps you would become impure yourself by the impurity of their lives and lose whatever degree of holiness that you might have about yourself. Over and over, when there is a woman who comes and anoints Jesus' feet with a jar of oil, what do the Pharisees say about her at that point? First, they say about Jesus, if he had been a prophet, really a prophet, he would have known what kind of sinful woman this is. He would have been aware of the fact that you can't get too close to people like that. But here in this place sitting with the boat, in the boat with Peter, that close in the midst of this miraculous catch of fish, it's enough to make Peter say, go away from me, Lord, for I'm a sinful man. It's the same language, isn't it, that you heard Helen read from the prophet Isaiah. When Isaiah finds himself before the divine presence in the temple, what does he? He says, woe, woe is me, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I live amongst the people of unclean lips. Woe is kind of like danger, Will Robinson, danger. You ought not to be in this place. It's dangerous to get too close to divine holiness. Peter seems to have an awareness of that. Go away, depart from me. This is too close, Jesus. I am a sinful man. What is it about our own sense of inadequacy, our own sense of sinfulness, Peter's sense of not being worthy enough, that wants to make sure he keeps the proper and appropriate distance between himself and Jesus? You could respond to Jesus at this point by saying, this is a great catch of fish, Jesus. It's pretty interesting, but you know, I'm a spiritual person. I'm not really a religious person. So you can keep going on your way. I appreciate the idea of what's happening here, but I don't want to get involved in it. Or you could say, this is a miraculous catch of fish, Jesus, pretty amazing, but I've got all kinds of things going on in my life, and when I get these other things sorted out, I'll come back to you and come back to what's happening here and see what I need to make of it, as though you can just kind of put Jesus in another category of activities or things that you plan or hope to get around to or want to get around to as soon as you take care of everything else. Peter's response seemed to be entirely different. Go away from me, for I am a sinful man. Peter seems to have a recognition at this point that whoever Jesus is, whatever is going on in his life, it asserts a very fundamental and consequential claim upon his life that he cannot evade and he cannot turn away from, because in fact it is now going to demand everything of him. Peter seems to recognize that. Go away from me, Lord. I'm afraid you will want my life for your own. Go away from me, Lord. I know who I am. Your presence is making it clear who I am. What's going on here is making it clear who I am. I'm just not worthy. I'm just not up to. I'm just not one who should be involved in the midst of this. Seems to me that at least we ought to give Peter credit for being honest and discerning the consequence of Jesus' presence being that close to him, being aware of the possibility of what Jesus' call may do to him. I wonder how willing we are to get that close to Jesus. How willing are you to, like Peter, discern the claim that God's divine presence, that God's Son wants to make on your life? How that may be the most consequential thing ever for you. Václav Havel was the Czechoslovakian playwright and writer and dissident who became president of Czechoslovakia after what was called the Velvet Revolution in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And not long after he had become president of Czechoslovakia, came and made a speech before the United States Congress. And one of the things that he said to the Congress was, "We have so much to learn from you. We who have been under such oppression, we have suffered so much. We have so much to learn from you and what you have been able to do in the society if you've been able to build, how you educate, how you legislate, how you work and do things well. We have so much to learn from you." But then he went also on to say, "And we have something to teach you." Because it's only the people who have been under a boulder for a long time that have spent a lot of time thinking about the nature of hope. And even though we've been a people who have been oppressed, even though we have been a people who have been imprisoned, even though we are a people who lack, we have something to offer to you, a central conviction. And the conviction, he said, is this conviction that I've come to in the midst of all that I've been through. And it is that that consciousness precedes being. In other words, the human spirit, the human imagination, the human ability to hope is more determinative than all of the circumstances in which the human being may find themselves in. He went on to say that this recognition that consciousness precedes being has been for people like himself and others under much oppression the Archimedean point in which they are able to leverage away some of the things that have oppressed them and free themselves to the transformative change which can be possible through the work of the human spirit. As I was reading that, it made me think, are we willing to say that our relationship with God, our awareness of who God is, what God has done for us in Jesus Christ, is the most consequential, determinative thing in our lives? And are we willing to be open to the call that it presents us, the call that it gives us? Are we willing to hear Jesus say, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will be those who work for me. From now on, you will be catchers of people." That's a willingness to let Jesus get very close. And I'm not sure how comfortable you are with that closeness, or any of us are. A number of years ago, it's only just about 3 years ago now, when Helen and I went to Israel, one of the highlights of the trip was to get on a fishing boat and go out onto the Sea of Galilee, early in the morning. It wasn't exactly the kind of fishing boat that Peter and James and John may have had. This had a kind of a diesel motor and had about room for 25 people on it, and one ran right after the other as people lined up with tickets to take their ride out onto the Sea of Galilee. But it was still a spectacular thing. We went early in the morning while the haze from the sea was just beginning to clear with our group. It was very quiet and very still. And then when we got out into the middle of the sea, the 3 or 4 men who were running the boat, I believe they were probably Palestinian, I'm not sure, they turned off the motor and then let our group have a little communion service there out on the Sea of Galilee. It was amazing. It was wonderful as the boat gently rocked and you could begin to see the shoreline. Such a powerful experience of being in the community of Christ and being in the area of Christ in some way, shape, or form. And then when it was over, the men running the boat went to turn the diesel engine on, and nothing happened. And so we sat there for a few minutes on the Sea of Galilee, drifting as they began to work on it. And as they began to hit it with a hammer and poke it with a screwdriver, sparks began to fly out of the diesel engine. And a little shoot of flame here, a little puff of smoke here. And then I began to hear things spoken in another language that I didn't hear and didn't understand fully. But maybe some of the things I wondered if the disciples would say as they were pulling in too much fish to cause their boat to sink. And I began to think to myself, oh, wonderful, out on the Sea of Galilee, and the boat's going to sink, and I'm going to have to swim back to shore now. Who would have ever thought that kind of thing could happen? Fortunately, it didn't. The motor came back on, and we putted on back to shore. But when you come to this table this morning, and Jesus says to you, take, eat, this is my body given for you, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen? Do you think Jesus might say, from now on, you will be a part of my body. You will be a part of the church. You will now work for me. And it's the most consequential thing you will ever do. Do you think that could happen? Amen.